Ecologistics, and we're hosting Robin again for the second time. How many of you were here last year for his talk? Wow, all good people. This is cool. Yeah, last year we talked about living without any possessions, and his trek down the west coast on foot. Tonight he's going to talk to us about his latest experiment. So Ecologistics puts on the annual Central Coast Pioneers Conference, and we've got some save the date cards on the back counter over there, and we have tons of interesting speakers like Robin coming to that conference. So we'd love to have you there, and we have a sign-up sheet for our email list so we can keep you advised of any new speakers coming to town. This is part of what we call our critical conversation series, where we bring in people that have incredible knowledge and are happy to share it with the public. So we're working on our next critical conversation will be in July, and it's a fabulous documentary called American Agitators about a gentleman who was a political organizer, and it's a documentary about him and his son. And so we're trying to get that for the Palm in July. So if you get on our mailing list, you'll find out when that is happening. But tonight, we're going to welcome Robin Greenfield. Robin lives simply and sustainably to be the change he wishes to see in the world, and an active resistance to destructive and exploitative systems of which surround us all the time. His life is an experiment with truth and integrity, dedicated to liberation and basic rights for all, Earth, humans, and the plants and animals we share his home with. For 1 year, Robin is foraging 100% of his food and medicine. A year without grocery stores, restaurants, or even a garden. Nature is his garden, his pantry, and his pharmacy. As he lives in close connection with Earth, he is traveling across the nation, giving talks, leading foraging walks, and hosting foraging schools, sharing about the food and medicine that is growing freely and abundantly all around us. Thanks, Robin.
Hello, everyone. Hi. Nice to be here with you. I just got into San Luis Obispo about 1 hour ago, and just settling in. So, as Stacy mentioned, my name is Robin, and I'm very grateful to be back here. This is our second event together with Ecologistics, and it's been really wonderful to collaborate with the work that you all are doing here and to help to bring in more critical conversation and empower the beautiful work that's been going on here for decades already. I am from northern Wisconsin, from a small town called Ashland on Lake Superior. And right now, I'm immersed in a year of foraging 100% of my food and medicine. This is my pantry that shows the foods that I'm eating, the wild rice and the fish and venison, the pear sauce, the herbs and spices, the salt, the maple syrup, the ferments and the mushrooms, the teas and the fruits. And this is a very deep practice of living in a state of connection with the earth. One of the greatest threats that I believe that we have as a humanity is this illusion of separateness, this idea that we're separate from the earth, we're separate from the plants and animals, we're separate from one another, our global neighbors, and even separate from ourselves. And for me, this is a practice of dissolving that illusion of separateness, because in order to eat, I have to go outside, and I have to build relationships with, it takes at least 100 different plants to be able to thrive in this way, plus fungi and fish and deer. So this is a deep practice of breaking free of systems that no longer serve, and of really attempting to live in a state of harmony with this earth, which many of us realize that to live in true harmony is actually a radical act in a society that is based around extreme destruction and exploitation and oppression. To simply try to live in harmony requires going to a very, very far end of the extreme compared to the way that we're living. So I'm going to share a little bit about that tonight, but before I dive into that, I'd like to share a little bit about my journey that got me to the place where I'm able to do this without, as many of you would imagine, if you were to try to forage 100% of your food for a year, you probably would struggle a bit, and so, or die. I didn't want to say or die. Or die. Yes. And so, I want to share about the journey that got me to the place where I could attempt to do this. Would you be interested to hear a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Okay. So as I shared, I grew up in northern Wisconsin in a small town. Population was 8,620 when I was growing up. It was me, my mom, and 3 siblings in a little 2.5 bedroom duplex on the corner of 3rd and Beezer. There was paint chipping off the walls of the home, and there was rust on the car. And from a young age, I had really 2 big aspirations. One was I loved the earth. My mom and dad are both hippies. They're Hare Krishnas. Lived in Eugene, Oregon. That's where they met, and then moved to northern Wisconsin. So I had that instilled in me from a young age, just to love the earth and care about the earth and the plants and animals. But then also being different. My mom is ethnically Jewish, so growing up in a Catholic, Christian-dominated society, not having a dad around, having a hippie mom in a not hippie place, I always felt like an outsider. And from a young age, I really wanted to belong. I really wanted to just sort of fit in, get my basic needs for love and connection. And the way that I saw that was through being normal. My friends, I would go over to their house, and instead of the glass jars that my mom had, they had Tupperware. So Tupperware was my dream. Plastic. I wanted a plastic. My friends' parents were doctors and lawyers and different things like that. And so I had my feet in both worlds. One, this deep love for the earth, where I was watching Discovery Channel and National Geographic at home every moment that I wasn't out catching frogs and turtles and going fishing. And then the other was the pursuit of money from a young age. I had a paper route at the age of 6th grade. I would, before that, run Kool-Aid stands, collect cans, sell worms for fishing bait. And then in high school, I worked at Hardee's, fast food. I got a job at a gas station as a lifeguard. I kept track of every dollar I earned, played a lot of poker, was pretty good at it. And I was very focused on material possessions and financial wealth, my clothes, all of that was very important to me. In university, I went to school for biology with a concentration on aquatic science, so I continued this desire to be working close to earth. And freshman year of college, I was recruited to sell educational books door to door for a company called Southwestern, and ended up being shipped out to Burbank, here in California. And there I worked 84 to 90 hours a week, selling books door to door, just knocking on doors. And the reason I gave up my summers as a Wisconsin, young man, it's like, you gotta give me something really enticing to get rid of, leave a summer vacation, was they told me I could make about $9,000 in the summer, which was a lot for me. I did well, and I made $20,000 that first summer, and so I learned that those skills I learned from selling popcorn in the Boy Scouts in my younger years had really paid off, and I could make a living selling stuff. And as many people know in sales, it's not what you're selling. You can sell anything if you have the skills. So I continued that through university, and then after university, I decided early on in university I wasn't going to go into aquatic science. I was going to go into sales so that I could work hard, make a good amount of money in a short period of time, and then spend my life, out there in the oceans, the lakes, the rivers, the forests, exploring the world. So in 2011, I moved to San Diego, and I started a marketing company, and I quickly had about 20 people selling, advertising. We put ads on the grocery store shopping carts. You've probably seen those plastic ads there before, as well as on the back of receipts at the grocery store, coupons on the back of receipts, and then on the key cards you get at your hotel room. We put ads on those So I set a goal of being a millionaire by the time I was 30. I was 25, and very quickly was on track. Was bringing in the funds to get to that place within a handful of years, and everything was going according to plan. I was traveling the world. I had friendship. I had romance. I loved my hobbies. I was a small town Wisconsin boy living 3 blocks from the beach in San Diego, and I was happy and I was healthy, and my young self would have been very proud of who I had become. So in every way, I could have continued on that trajectory and lived a good life. And then something happened, and I realized that I wanted to radically transform my life. And when a lot of people hear that, they imagine some sort of near-death experience or an aha moment, a moment of enlightenment. But what happened for me was I just simply started to watch documentaries and read books. I watched The Story of Stuff, the series by Annie Leonard, and Food Inc., and got tuned into books like The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan. And I just learned that the way that I was living was causing so much destruction. The food I was eating, the car I was driving, the stuff I was buying, the money I was spending and investing, even the water I was drinking in San Diego was part of the Colorado River running dry with every cup that I filled. So I learned that basically what we call the American dream is ultimately the world's nightmare. It's a nightmare for billions of people around the world. And in many ways, it's a lie. It's a grand delusion. When you realize that this country is, to a large degree, founded upon the enslavement of 7 million people stolen away from Africa and the genocide of hundreds of indigenous cultures, and that this is baked into our Constitution and trickles into laws, state laws and local laws across the nation, but is barely spoken about in mainstream, you see at a foundational level that this country is not what it says that it is. And our corporations, what you see on the commercials does not represent the reality of what's happening behind the scenes of all of these products. So there was some real feelings learning all this, disheartenment, disappointment, overwhelm, anxiety, like I'm sure every single one of us experiences sometimes, and some of us experience that every day right now. And also a little anger, realizing all of this. But at the same time as I felt all of that, there was feelings that I had that were even more powerful, and that was I was inspired, I was invigorated, I was excited. And the reason why is these books, these documentaries, these organizations, these human beings, they weren't just sharing the problems that existed, they were sharing solutions. They were sharing that there were alternative ways of existing, that we could do things differently. And so what I decided is that's what I was going to do. I was going to, one step at a time, unravel this web of consumerism that I had so deeply woven myself into. Create a new strand, a strand of living sustainably, of living simply, of living in more connection, of critical thinking, of community, coming back to living local and breaking free from the monetary system and so on. So I made an objective to make just one positive change per week. That started with a lot of small things, like I was using paper towels and I stopped using paper towels and just started using reusable washcloths, for example. Or I got a water filter and put that on my tap rather than having bottled water. I started to ride my bike more and drive the car less. I started to go, at the time, most of my groceries were coming from Walmart. That was my grocery store and my store of choice. And I started to go to a local store. I started to go to Trader Joe's, and then I realized Trader Joe's just is greenwashing, basically. They just have really good marketing. And then I got connected with the local farmers market. I started to buy a lot of local fruits and vegetables. I got connected with the People's Organic Market. It's a food co-op in Ocean Beach in San Diego. And they have the bulk section, and that's where I started to base my diet from, being able to get all my foods, my grains, my nuts, seeds, oils, spices, all I could bring my own containers so I wasn't creating all this garbage. I looked at all the products that I was putting on my body, Old Spice deodorant, for example, and I thought to myself, why am I wearing Old Spice deodorant? And the answer was because they have really convincing commercials, and they have led me to believe that in order to be loved by society, I need to wear Old Spice. So I put the Old Spice on the curb. This was 15 years ago. I haven't worn deodorant since, and if you're wanting to see or smell what that experiment is going like, you can come up and share a hug afterwards. Anyone here no longer wear deodorant? All right, we got a handful, good handful in the room. Anyone that never wore deodorant in their life? All right, there's always one person more crazy than me. Or more normal, however you want to put it. So I was just letting go of all these societal norms and structures, and what I found that was the most challenging part often wasn't the physical action in itself. It was the, what will people think about me? So after a while I decided I wanted to get rid of my car, which was a big deal. My car was a big part of my identity. I had a new car that I would spend shining for an hour every Sunday with the armor all and the chrome wheel polish, whatever you call it. And where I grew up in northern Wisconsin, if you were an adult riding a bicycle in plain street clothes, people would assume there was one reason you were riding a bike, and it's because you got a DUI. So that's the level of stigma that I was up against. And what I started to do was, instead of asking the question consciously or subconsciously, which I had asked thousands of times, of what will people think, every time I was looking to change something in my life and take a new action, I would ask, is this beneficial for the earth, my community, and myself? That was my new lens for looking at the world. And that was the greatest freedom that I ever had found, is just dropping the worry of what people think about me. Of course, there's still some of that. We'll never ascend that completely, but to not let that be the dominating force in which decided my actions. So after about 2 years, I had made 100 changes. One positive change per week for 2 years is 104 changes. And at that point, I analyzed my life as I constantly was doing, and I realized that I started out at let's say a level 9 or 10 hypocrite, and now I was down to a level 5 hypocrite. Still a hypocrite, because if you want to remain in this society while living your beliefs, you're gonna have hypocrisy. There's no way around it. But at this point, I felt like I was the change that I wish to see in the world. And now it was time for me to go out and really share this message. From the beginning, Mahatma Gandhi's been one of my biggest influences, and he says, be the change you wish to see in the world. So that's what I was doing, starting with myself. And then secondly, he said, let my life be my message. And so that's what I decided to do, was to just live my life and let my life be my message. So from the beginning, I was documenting this journey. But in 2013, I went for my first environmental adventure, and it was to bike across the United States from San Francisco to Vermont while having no negative environmental impact. So basically crossing the country and analyzing and paying attention to every single way in which I interacted with the earth, down to I was only using electricity that I generated from my little solar panels or my human body. And if I wanted to walk into a store that only had automatic doors, I'd have to wait till someone else walked in. I couldn't push the button to cross the streets. I was paying attention to every little thing. My rule was I could not use water from the faucet all the way across the country. I had to harvest my water from lakes and rivers and rain. And for food, I could only eat local, organic, unpackaged food. So I immersed in sustainability to the most extreme level that I could, and invited others along for the journey as I was biking across the country. So the bike trip was a vessel, a package that was designed to create a story, a narrative for people to follow and join in, learning what I was learning at the same time and share it. When I started, I didn't have a following. It was 2013. It was, Instagram was barely a thing. YouTube was not that big. Facebook, you still didn't have Facebook pages, just profiles for the most part. So I started out just posting in Facebook groups, letting people know what I was doing. And then when I got to Holdridge, Nebraska, I started to ride my bike up to the local news stations, and I would just pull right up and I'd say, hey, I'm biking across the country on a bamboo bike, raising awareness about sustainability. Would you be interested in doing a story? And they would say, well, this is Holdridge, Nebraska. We have nothing else going on. And I found that I was able to start reaching thousands of people through the mainstream media, reaching people who often haven't thought about these things before, just like I hadn't really much of a couple of years prior. So with my activism, it's not about good or bad. It's not about right or wrong. I actually don't believe, those are just ideas. Those are just concepts. And it's not about have to or should or guilt or shame or blame. It's just, here's another way. Here's the times we're living in. Here's a reality that we're not being shared. And then here's another way if you're interested. So I don't put an ounce of energy into people who are disinterested. I put all of my energy into the millions of people who have woken up and want out of the ways that they're currently living and want into a new way. And by doing that, my energy is magnified. Instead of putting it into someone who's not going to make any changes and is just going to suck my energy out of me, I put it into someone where I see the meaningful impact in their life and enriches their life and mine. So that's basically what keeps me going, is just focusing on being of support to people who are here and they're just needing the extra motivation, inspiration, knowledge, skills, resources. So my activism has always been pretty extreme. Part of the reason why is because I am by nature an extreme person. I've always tested things even as a young person. But the other reason why it's extreme is because this country, we have 5% of the world's population, but we consume 25% of the world's resources. This, by definition, is extreme. So I am a product of this extreme society, and the only thing that I can do in my heart is to go to the extreme, because I want to step outside of that and do things in a truly harmonious way, which is amazingly an extreme thing. And so the other reason why, though, is my activism is designed to kind of wake us up from the sleepy state that we're in. So one of my campaigns in 2016 was I set aside my zero waste ways and my sustainable living, and for 1 month I lived like the average person. I ate, I shopped, I consumed, just like most of us are used to, but with one big exception. I had no garbage can. Instead, I had to wear every single piece of trash that I created. So I had a specially designed suit made with clear plastic pockets throughout the whole suit, from ankle all the way up to neck. And each day, I went to the grocery store. I stood in the Whole Foods line. I went to McDonald's and got a Big Mac on day 4. Tried to go to the movie theaters. They would not let me in. I rode the metro. I did Uber until I couldn't fit into that anymore either. And so basically, the average person creates about 4.5 pounds of trash per day. So each day I was getting larger and larger. And people would walk up to me and they would say, just, what are you doing? And I would say, oh, I'm just living like the average person, but I'm wearing all of my garbage. And in many of them you would see the light bulbs would go off. Oh, that's me. That's what I would look like if I held on to all of my garbage. So by having no judgment, the walls were let down, and instead people were open to hearing. And so that was pretty much the most enjoyable month of my entire life, interestingly enough. My activism has consistently come back to food over the last decade, which was never the plan. It's just what has happened. And the reason for that is I really realized that food is at the center of our being. You know, many of us, we eat to live, we live to eat. It's at the core of our social lives, our physical well-being. At the core, the food is our connection to the earth. All cultures have been created around food and our relationship to the plants and the animals and the ecosystems in which we harvest our foods and medicines. So I've consistently come back to food. Early on, I did a lot of raising awareness about food waste. I would do this through dumpster diving, through diving into the dumpsters and grocery store dumpsters primarily, taking out the perfectly good food and then eating it and showing like this is all perfectly good food that's going to waste. So I've done stints where I've lived only off food from grocery store dumpsters for, if I recall, a couple months at a time, and the media loves it. It just is such a good way to get in to then talk about how in this country we waste half of all the food we produce, while 1 in 7 U.S. Americans are food insecure. We have no food shortage problem. Some people would say we have a distribution problem, but I would say we have a capitalism problem. We have the problem that food has been made into a commodity rather than a life-giving substance, rather than the life-giving force that it is. So for 5 years, that's where a lot of my activism was. And then in 2016, I decided to see if I could break free from the global industrial food system completely. And to do that, I was going to grow and forage 100% of my food and medicine for a year. So no grocery stores, no restaurants, no multivitamins, no supplements, just what I could grow in my gardens or forage, what was growing freely and abundantly all around us. I had two main hurdles to overcome. First, I didn't know how to grow food really, or forage. I had done a little bit, I volunteered at the community gardens, planted fruit trees, I took my permaculture design certificate, but I did not have much real experience. So what I did is I decided to do this in Orlando, Florida, because there's a large movement of permaculturists there, a group called Orlando Permaculture. And I visited their food forests that they had, taken from their yards and turned into gardens. I got involved with community gardens. I went to the local nurseries, to the permaculture convergence, to the Florida School of Holistic Living. I went on foraging walks with local instructors, and I just asked the questions and took in the knowledge. One of my big questions was, what grows so well here that you have to give it away because you have so much of it? You can't kill because it's so productive. And rather than asking, what do I want, I asked, what does the earth provide in abundance? And that's what I focused on. I gave myself 6 months to go from 0% to 100%. The other challenge that I had to overcome first, though, was that I also had nowhere to grow food. I just arrived there, I didn't own any land, and I wasn't going to buy any land. So what I did is I just put the word out in the community that I was looking for yards to turn into gardens. And that in exchange for me being able to use that space, that they would be able to enjoy the food, and then after I left, the garden would be completely theirs. And quickly I had a list of over 3 dozen people who wanted me to do this. And I realized it turns out there's a lot of people who are very tired of their lawns and would rather have an abundance of food and medicine growing right outside their doors. So I turned 6 yards into gardens, and instead of 6 months, it turned into 10 months. I was ready to begin. And the reason that it ended up being 10 months is because I started 4 community programs that I was working on at the time. There was Gardens for Single Moms, Community Fruit Trees, which we will hopefully talk a little bit about tonight, the Free Seed Project, and Community Compost. So on November 11th, 2018, I emerged that day. And in a short summary, I could talk about that project for easily an hour and a half, but the year went overall well. I had my ups and downs and my struggles, but I finished the year in about as healthy of a state that I had been in my adult life. two big takeaways that I had during that year. One, I was standing in the front yard garden that a year and a half ago had been just a lawn with, just grass and sand. And I realized that I was standing about almost a foot higher up than the sidewalk than when I had arrived. What that was all mulch, so tree trimmings that I had dumped there. When companies cut down trees, a lot of times that goes to a landfill. But instead I would have them dump that right in the yard, and that breaks down and turns into soil to grow food in. So all this is carbon being sequestered, and I realized that after a year and a half of harvesting hundreds of pounds of food and medicine, there's not less to give, there's more to give. So it was a deep realization of reciprocity, that we can be stewards of our own little plots of land and create more biodiversity and abundance. The other big realization after a year and a half of foraging, I foraged over 200 different foods and medicines during that year. In the past, I would drive down the highway and I would see the billboards for the fast food and the grocery stores and all of that. But now I saw the billboards of Mother Earth. I saw the black walnuts and the mulberries and the elderberries and the stinging nettle, the loquats. I saw food and medicine destroying food abundantly all around me. And I never looked at the world the same. And that's been the case for 7 years now. In 2022, I set out to do 1 month of foraging all of my food and medicine. So this time I would have no gardens. And I did this starting in Wisconsin, in my hometown, and I traveled to New York leading plant walks along the way. I gave myself just 9 days to prepare for that because I didn't have to grow anything. It was already abundant, and I did this in the fall when there was a lot to be harvested. The month went well. However, on the last day it was over, the first place I went was to the grocery store, and I bought myself some pints of pecan butter, and I ate them all the way down. I couldn't do another day. That was it. That's all I had in me was 1 month. I would say deficient at the end of it, and that's what I could do. So that brings us to today-ish. 3 years later, I was here in California a year ago, finishing up my experiment of non-ownership, and I was sitting in Vipassana meditation out in 29 palms, and as I do when I meditate, instead of being in the present moment, I think of what I'm going to do in the future. And I asked myself, what do I want to be doing more than anything in the world? And the answer came so clearly that I wanted to move back to the land and the waters that raised me and made me who I am, and immerse in a year of foraging all of my food and medicine. There's numerous reasons why that. I'll share a couple reasons. First of all, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, that I believe that one of the greatest threats of our time is this belief that we're separate. And my way, and that has been a belief that has been deeply ingrained in me. I grew up in this dominator culture, and I believed that to the largest degree for so much of my life. And so what I want to do is dissolve that illusion of separateness. Theoretically, I know that I am not separate, that I am nature, that nature is me, that I'm part of this all, that I am an animal like many other mammals are. Theoretically, I know this, but I am working to be able to feel that in every cell of my being. That's something that I'm striving for. And in every ounce of my body, that I know that I'm not separate from the world, and that I am at home here. I want to feel at home wherever I am, and to truly know that I belong here on earth. So one of the things that we're taught today is when we go out to nature to leave no trace. I don't want to leave no trace because I want to be interconnected with these ecosystems, and you can't leave no trace. Humans have been, in many scenarios, a keystone species, where our interaction with the ecosystem has helped the ecosystem to thrive and be its fullest self. That's what I want to do, not leave no trace. And that's what I want to help others do as well. So this is just a deep practice of breaking free, a deep practice of finding a home on this earth and a home inside of myself. And by immersing in this deep journey, it's an opportunity for me to practice another thing, which is that I want to live in a state of love with this earth. Many of us practice that as well. You know, one way we can practice that is through our words and through our thoughts, through meditation and such. But what I'm working on is that every action that I take is an embodiment of love. And through establishing relationships with hundreds of different plants and mushrooms and animals and fish, this for me is a daily practice of existing in a state of love for this earth. And when we love, we are stewards, we take care. So, yeah, and then also, foraging results in eating some of the most nutritious and delicious foods on earth. And I really like all of these wild foods. So I'm not sacrificing anything. My activism and my work is not about sacrificing. It's about instead just finding a way to live on this earth in the most rich form that is enriching to the world around rather than pillaging and taking from the world around. So those are a few reasons why. On that note, would you all be interested in hearing a little bit about what are in these jars and what I'm eating? All right. I know at least one of you are thinking to yourself, finally, the jars! So I'll probably take about maybe 15, I'll take about 15 minutes, maybe, yeah, about 15 minutes to share what's in these jars, and then a few key points around foraging, but I want to leave plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to do my best to be done speaking at about 8:50, well, yeah, let's see. I'm done speaking about 8, so then we can open it up to questions, and then have plenty of time for, oh gosh, there's not enough time for everything. That's what I'm going to try to do. Talk for about 15 more minutes, and then open it up to questions, and then we'll have community time. So, okay, this is one of my most important foods. Who knows who we have here?
Wild rice.
Yes, wild rice, also called monomen, the good berry, or the food that grows on water. Monomen is Ojibwe Moen. This is the language of the people from where I am from, the Anishinaabe people, and they are the people of the wild rice. Their creation story is largely based around the wild rice. So you have people who are the people of the corn, or the wheat, or the quinoa. And where I'm from, the Anishinaabe people are the people of the wild rice. And this is a plant that's very dear to me because when I take part in this plant, I'm taking part in an unbroken relationship, human-plant relationship of at least 700 years. It's not every day that you get to take part in that type of human-plant relationship. So I go out in my canoe with a partner. One person pulls along, and the other person is called knocking, where you're basically bringing the big, it's a grass, these, like wheat. It looks like wheat. You kind of bring them over the boat, and then whoosh, 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 and that knocks whoosh, the rice into the boat. So with every whoosh, that's another bite, whoosh, another bite, whoosh, another bite. And if things go well, your canoe is filled up at the end of the day if it goes really well. And on a good day, I'm able to have about 35 pounds of finished wild rice for one day of harvesting. So it's food that really sustains you. And what sustains me is what I start to love even more. Some people say, are you supposed to be harvesting wild rice since you're not native? And the answer is absolutely. And the reason why is because the Anishinaabe people know that the more people who love wild rice, the more people who will steward the wild rice, and the wild rice will thrive. So it's regulated by GLFWC, Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, along with the Department of Natural Resources, and there's regulations around it. For example, you can only do it in a canoe. And when you do this in a canoe, it guarantees that every single time you knock it, you plant it. It won't all fall into the boat. So it's based around traditional ecological knowledge. So I could easily talk about wild rice for an hour, but I'll share that, and I'm going to pass this around. So you can smell it, you can go up and put your fingers in there and feel some of the grains. And just a deep level of gratitude to the Anishinaabe people for being stewards of the wild rice. Sometimes I'm out there and I'm thinking to myself, wild rice is wild, right? So foraging, right? But if they've been stewarding it for 700 years, am I foraging or am I in somebody's garden? That's the idea of foraging. It's about really critically thinking about connecting to our space. This is stinging nettle. This is my top 10 wild edibles. And I like to make a lot of tea from this, as well as add it to my soups and stews. The stinging nettle, if you don't want to be stung when you're harvesting it, you can wear, thick gloves. But the sting of stinging nettle actually is beneficial. It's actually used intentionally in a practice called urtication for stimulating blood flow, especially for people with diabetes, as well as on the joints for people who have arthritis. It's been practiced for hundreds or thousands of years. And when we're stung by stinging nettle, endorphins are released in our system. So if you're feeling a little disconnected and a little lonely at home in the air conditioning watching the TV, the answer might be just to go out and get stung by a little bit of stinging nettle. If you don't want to be stung in the mouth, what you can do is you can cook it, dehydrate it, or blend it in pesto, and all of those things destroy the stingers. So it's very easy to eat it. And also, after 10 years of being afraid of getting stung in the mouth, I realized it's actually not that big of a deal after all. I just realized that this year. So that's stinging nettle. I eat a lot of venison and a lot of fish. So my fish, I go fishing. That's something I've been doing since I was about 6 years old or so, a skill that I've had for some time. These are called smelt, so kind of like sardines. They're a little bait fish that we use nets to catch. And then my venison, this is what some people call roadkill, but it's what I call a deer that was hit by a car. And the reason I don't say roadkill is because when we say roadkill, we create this big othering scene, this gory scene. But, the deer was a deer while it was walking along or running. It was a deer when it was hit by the car, and it's still a deer, first and foremost, when it's on the side of the road. It's about, for me, people are like, how do you know it's still good? I use my common senses, my eyes, my nose, my touch, and then lastly, my taste as a last thing. And if you're really interested in that, in the back of my book that I have here, there's a 5-page guide called How to Harvest a Car-Killed Deer. Whether it's just an armchair interest or you're like, it sounds like a pretty good way to harvest my meat, that guide will be there for you. And this is called pressure canning. So those of you wondering, how do you have jars of meat sitting out? This is a very basic practice that a lot of homesteaders and gardeners do. When you pressure can, basically it superheats it, killing any bacteria inside, including botulism spores. And then when you take it out, it vacuum seals. So no bacteria can get in there, and this can be shelf stable for years and even decades. So here we have pear sauce. It's not dead from the side of the road and it won't sting you, so I think I'll get a little bit easier support with this one. I eat a lot of applesauce, pear sauce, and plum sauce, and this is one of my staple foods. So on the top, this kind of focuses a lot on where I get my calories, my carbs, my fat, and my protein. And then this makes up a pretty substantial amount of calories as well. I tend to eat about a pint of sauce per day. Down here I have my maple syrup, and I went 6 months without sugar because maple syrup is a springtime food, and I started in the fall. And I'm thoroughly enjoying having sugar again back in my life. Very tasty. I have green powder, so I try to eat ideally about a pound of wild greens per day. Right now in California, that's mustard, mallow, nasturtium, lamb's quarters, dock, New Zealand spinach, sow thistles, to name a handful of them. When I don't have access to fresh greens, which is some few months of the year. What I've done is I've harvested those greens, dehydrated them, and then I turned them into a powder. Just like a lot of people go and they buy their super greens, you know, vitamin mix and stuff, but we can make that from the greens in our gardens and that is growing all around us in the parks. And then I just add a spoonful, a nice hefty spoonful into each meal. And that's how I can do my greens. It's amazing how much watercress turns into, like, I mean, this would be like a bag of watercress like this into this jar. So it's very, very nutrient dense. This is basically my multivitamin. I eat a lot of seaweed. This is rockweed and bladderwrack. There's wonderful seaweeds available here in the Pacific Ocean. This is from the Atlantic Ocean. My main spice is wild onions, as well as bee balm or bergamot, wild bergamot, also called Bernarda, and that's got oregano in it, so it's a very oregano flavor. So this is my spice mix, but I also do a lot of fermented. This is fermented wild garlic. I do a lot of fermented wild ramps, and this flavor changes. I've been fermenting these since I was in Savannah, Georgia, where I got them about 3 months ago. I think they passed their prime. They were better a month ago. They were at their peak when I crossed the desert to get here after like 100-degree day. After that, they went downhill. But a lot of ferments. This is a tree. Well, this is Brazilian pepper. Here you have the Peruvian pepper. In fact, right outside this front door, when you walk outside, there'll be a big tree with little peppercorns falling to the ground. That's the Peruvian pepper, and you can eat those peppercorns. This is the Brazilian pepper that I harvested in Florida. It's floral, fruity, and its own type of spice. I'm going to pass this around so you can all try it if you'd like to, with a note that this is in the Anacardiaceae family, which is the same family as mangoes and cashews and poison ivy. So if you're allergic to any of those, you can decide if you want to put this in your mouth or not. Personally, I am even a little bit allergic to those, but a small quantity of this is minor. I don't have any reaction to small quantities. So you're welcome to try this, and I have plenty, so don't be concerned about it. And there's a tree right outside the doors more if I need more. So that's one of my spices, Brazilian pepper. I harvest my salt from the ocean, so I just go to the ocean with a bucket, fill it up with water, take that home. You can put that in glass baking trays that are about like a standard glass baking tray, and it'll take about a week under conditions like today for that to evaporate and be left with salt, using no energy. Sometimes I boil it if I'm in a hurry and I'm on the road. I'm going to be making more salt in Santa Cruz tomorrow or the next day because this is the last of my salt. So 1 5-gallon bucket of ocean water creates 2 jars this size worth of salt. Ocean water is 3.5% salt. And of course what I do is I go to the cleanest beach to harvest my water. And what I do is I open up the container below the surface level, because pollutants are often, like oil slicks would be on the surface if that is there, and then you can always filter it too if you desire to. So a note about salt, I eat a lot of mushrooms. These are chanterelles. The key to harvesting mushrooms is to start with the easy beginner mushrooms. I use this book here called Mushrooms of the Upper Midwest. But here in California, we have numerous easy to identify mushrooms, including chanterelles. You have lobster mushrooms out here? Does anyone know? Yeah. How about chicken of the woods? That's a nice, easy one. So you have, those are the ones that I go with, is the easy to identify mushrooms. This is my taki powder. So this is one of my staple mushroom powders. Oh, some money in there. Here we have Japan holly. This is North America's only really caffeinated plant. So if you're looking for a sustainable source of caffeine, you could look into this. Yaupon is Y-A-U-P-O-N. It grows mostly in the Gulf Coast states. So North Carolina down to Florida and over to Texas. It's a native plant, and it's basically the North American cousin to yerba mate that you would get in Argentina. Same basic nutritional profile as green tea, and a wonderful medicine. And if any of you come to my foraging school in San Francisco this weekend, I will be serving Yapan holly. Down here, lots of fruits. So I have, this is one you probably wouldn't know here. This is autumn olive or autumn berry. This is a plant that's considered invasive, and I'll take a moment to talk about that term. I don't call plants invasive or label them invasive or say that this plant is a bad plant. Most plants that are considered invasive are that way because human beings have introduced them, taken them out of their normal ecosystem and put them into another ecosystem where they end up out-competing the native plants and doing harm to the local ecosystem. So instead of saying this plant is invasive, I just say that the actual situation going on there. Now some people will say to me, Robin, or to you, that you shouldn't forage because we need to leave the wild spaces for the animals. We've already taken too much. Eat from the farms, eat from the grocery stores, and don't forage. And this is the epitome, to me, of how incorrect that statement is. Because when we harvest plants that are considered invasive, we're actually doing an ecosystem service. The native animals are not dependent upon these plants. They don't have these dependent endemic relationships. And the reality is that by harvesting these plants, we can actually help to remove them and restore native ecosystems. So you've heard of being an herbivore or a carnivore. Well, you can become an invasivore, which is a person who focuses on eating invasive plants. So that's one of the easiest places to get started to harvest in a way that does no harm. And the great one for that is the wild mustard. You see acres and miles of wild mustard. All of those little yellow flowers are like little spicy broccolis. And you can pick those and you can eat them fresh, put them in salads, saute them. They're one of my favorite. They're probably my #1 California food to forage. And I will sometimes eat a pound of that per day. In the spring especially, you can harvest the young tender stalks, and they're basically like little broccoli raabs or broccolinis. Saute those in olive oil, coconut oil, bacon fat, whatever you use, with some vinegar or lemon and some salt, and there's few people who would not enjoy that. So harvesting the plants that are considered invasive. I have, so this is a practice for me of my food is my medicine. Every single food here is a medicine for me. And elderberry, this is a perfect example of my food being my medicine. I love elderberry, which is abundant right now to be harvested, of the black or root elderberry. And it's a wonderful food. You can make elderberry pies and elderberry juice and so on. But this is really well known for preventing cold or flu, or if you have cold or flu, helping to ward it off, and many other benefits. So every single thing here, my meat, my rice, my fruits, it's all a medicine for me. Some of them are more particularly medicinal, like the elderberry. Another really particularly medicinal for me is my medicinal mushroom tea. So this is reishi, chaga, turkey tail, which I just saw a lot of this growing in Santa Barbara, Ventura 2 days ago, plus maitake and lion's mane. Actually, I don't think there's lion's mane in this mix. So this is for me a really important medicine. If you've heard of Paul Stamets, the Stamets stack, you can buy that at the grocery store, but you can also harvest these medicines growing abundantly all around us. Well, not all around us. These are, you'll find these in less places, but they're around. And then down here, lots of herbal teas. So I have about 50 plants that I make herbal teas from. A great way to start with herbals is Rosemary Gladstar's Medicinal Herbs. And the book that I use for foraging herbs is Midwest Medicinal Plants. This is by Timber Press, and there is one for this region for the medicinal plants. It's a great series that they have for around the country. So this is my key book for that. And then herbalism, if you're wanting to start, is so simple. Herbalism has been practiced for as long as human beings have been around, and it's as simple as going out in your yard and harvesting a dandelion. That's where it can start, or harvesting plantago and making tea. And to make tea with fresh leaves, it's as simple as putting them into a cup, pouring boiling water into that cup, waiting 5 minutes, and drinking it. You now are practicing basic herbalism. It's a very simple thing to do. And this book teaches you how to know, grow, and use. And there's many herbalists out there. Are there any herbalists here tonight? All right, a couple. Do you teach herbalism, or are there ways for people to get involved?
Yeah, I'm a nurse midwife. Allison Ward, CNN is my Instagram. I have a women's health line of tinctures. Sure. Yeah, thanks.
Wonderful. Yeah, thanks for sharing. So if you're wanting to get involved in herbalism, you have a wonderful resource here. And yes, so that's an introduction to a lot of what I'm eating. And also lots of nuts. So I eat black walnuts, acorns. This is the bur oak acorn. Chestnuts in very limited quantities this year. Pecans and hazelnuts, or hickory nuts, and also hazelnuts, which are at the top. So I eat a lot of wild nuts. They probably make up right now 10% of my calories or so. So that's a little peek into what what makes up my diet. And then my basic, most common meal: wild rice with greens, either venison or fish, herbs, salt, mushrooms, some ferment. All put into, I carry an Instant Pot with me. I can just put it into the pot, plug it in, turn it on, and that is my breakfast, lunch, and dinner many days. And I can just plug that in at a rest stop, a gas station, someone's home, and that's how I'm traveling, eating a 100% forage diet on the road. So, if I come over to your house, the answer is no, you cannot give me the foods from your refrigerator. Even while I'm traveling, everything that I'm eating, I'm growing, or I'm foraging. So that's a little bit of introduction, and then a few notes before opening it up to questions. Foraging is safe. The number one rule of foraging is you only eat something if you're 100% sure you properly identified. It's as simple as that. That's the way to be safe with foraging. You don't need to learn all the toxic plants in order to eat one plant. You can start with dandelion or nasturtium flowers or wild mustard. You only need to know one plant, not all the toxic plants. So it's safe to start there. One of the easiest ways to really get started is to go out with foraging instructors. So I've created the database findaforager.com, which has over 500 foraging instructors on it that you can learn from. If you are wanting to go on a foraging walk, I'm leading one tomorrow in Santa Cruz from 6 to 8, so if you could carpool up there and enjoy that. I'm also doing a full day-long foraging school in Presidio Park on Sunday in San Francisco. So if you really want an immersion, you can do that. Or if you'll be traveling this summer, I'm doing foraging schools in Portland as well as Port Townsend, Washington. So you can go to robingreenfield.org/schedule, and that's where I share all of my upcoming plant walks, talks, and foraging schools. And just a small mention on that, if you want to let your friends know to come out, I'll be in Santa Cruz, the Bay Area, Sebastopol, Davis, Sacramento, Grass Valley, Mount Shasta, Eugene, Ashland, Portland, Seattle, Langley, Port Townsend. So if you have friends in any of those areas, feel free to let them know so they can come out if they would like to. So foraging is safe. Foraging is also sustainable. There are so many foods and medicines that we can harvest. I mentioned harvesting invasive plants. The other thing you can do is harvest the weeds. Eat the weeds. There's so many weeds already growing that we're pulling up from our yards, and we can be eating those instead. And then the other thing, eat the gifts. One of my greatest influences as of the last years is Robin Kimmerer. She wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. How many of you have read Braiding Sweetgrass? Okay, a good number of us. So she is one person who really instilled in me this idea of eating the gifts. The apples are a gift. The berries are a gift. They're saying, please eat me. It's their way of distributing their seeds. So eating plants considered invasive, eating the weeds, and eating the gifts are the easy places to start. Digging up roots and cutting down shoots can be done sustainably, but often requires a little bit more knowledge. But even goes so far as to say camas, which is limited in some areas, and is that like 15%, 5% of its original population? Actually, one of the reasons that it's not doing well is because there's no human beings eating it, and there's no grizzly bears anymore to dig it up. So even native plants that people would tell you never to touch, when you learn how to work with them, you can actually. Very much. I'm very grateful to be here. So grateful to Ecologistics for having me back in San Luis Obispo, and thinking still he's not too crazy to have him back.